Good morning. Today we read 1 Samuel 15 and 16. And again, these chapters talk about some more of King Saul's failure to hear the word of the Lord, to follow the word of the Lord. You know, it starts out Samuel saying to Saul, "The Lord has sent me to anoint you king." And that's already been done. We know that. And now, therefore, listen to the word of the Lord. The Lord says, "I will punish the Amalekites." And the Amalekites were believed to be descendants of Esau. So, I mean, we can track all of this, the biblical scholars do, track these peoples, back to their ancestral roots. But God says he's going to punish them for what they did in opposing the Israelites when I was leading them out of captivity in Egypt. God says to Samuel, to Saul, "Go now and totally destroy the Amalekites." All the people, all of their livestock, everything, And so Saul musters his army and they go. And they have a resounding victory. However, he brings the king back captive. They bring much of the plunder, the sheep and the livestock back, the best of the best, and God is displeased with Saul because he didn't follow explicitly what God was to say. And I think about that, God is very specific in what he tells him to do. And when it doesn't get done the way God says, God doesn't like that. And I think about that in regard to God looking at us as we follow the Ten Commandments and as we follow the other commandments, especially, love one another as I have loved you, love Lord your God with, and we're not very good at that. And I think about, the kind of the pickiness, maybe we could say, of God in saying, I want you to do what I tell you, don't do it halfway, do it completely. Anyway, Saul doesn't follow the Lord's instructions exactly. Verse 10, the word of the Lord comes to Samuel, "I regret that I made Saul king." And so like yesterday as we read, it was debating whether Saul was king for 2 years or how long he was king. Don't really know, but, here already, early on, God has said, "I regret appointing Saul as king. For he has turned his back from following me. He has not carried out my commands." And again, this is God. I think about God with, Adam and Eve. You can eat of any of the tree except the tree of the, and what do? And then I think about God with Noah. God says to Noah, "Build me an ark out here in the middle of dry land." And Noah does. He builds this ark exactly as God tells him. And so when people follow what God says, good things, better things happen to them than if they don't. Anyway, Samuel rises early in the morning and goes to see Saul. And he's told, well, Saul went to Carmel where he set up a monument for himself on returning. And so Samuel goes there. And Saul greets him, "May you be blessed by the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord." In his mind, he has done what God said. But we know that he didn't, right? Yeah. And again, I translate that to us today. We know what God says. And sometimes we think we do everything God says, but, I'm not as bad as somebody. We make excuses. We do those kinds of things that way. But, we look at this history of the Bible, the history of these people and their relationship to God and how God reacts to, their lack of following instructions completely. You shall have no other gods. So, and what do? They build altars and they build idols and they worship anything and everything. And they cast silver statues to have in their homes, rather than to worship God. They are worshiping and giving, praying to these false images. Saul feels that he has done right. And Samuel says, well, what is this bleating of the sheep I hear and the lowing of the cattle that I hear? And Saul says, well, they brought them back because we took the best of the best, and we brought them to sacrifice to the Lord, Well, even that excuse, didn't excuse what he had done. And I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night, because, God was displeased with Saul, still is displeased with Saul. And he had spoken to Samuel, his prophet, the judge, the seer, the truth speaker, and so God had said, go, utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you not obey? And again, I think about me with that. I mean, because it hits each and every one of us, because we know that we're sinners. Anyway, and Saul says, well, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I went on the mission that he sent me. I brought Agag, the king, back, and I utterly destroyed them. But from the spoil, the people took the sheep and the cattle, the best of the things to sacrifice, and so it's the people trying to pass the buck a little bit, and, as commander, as king, Saul allowed that. And again, this is, not, Saul himself. Maybe he didn't bring, some sheep and cattle back, but his army did. And this was against what God had said. So Samuel then asked, has the Lord great delight in burnt offerings or obeying the voice of the Lord? Surely to obey is better than to sacrifice. And that's, we hear this expression, it's just do it and then we can ask for forgiveness later. Well, this isn't what Samuel is saying to Saul, is it? It's not okay to just do it and then hope we get forgiveness later. I mean, nope, that's not what God is saying to do. We're to do as God says. And it just goes on with Saul and Samuel talking, and Saul realizes in verse 30, I have sinned, yet honor me now before the elders of my people and return with me so that I may worship the Lord. So even though he says, I know that I sinned, but give me honor, give me praise. And Samuel says, bring Agag the king to me. And he comes. And, Samuel kills him, cuts him, and this is God's showing then what's going to happen, in Israel. And again, chapter 15 ends with the Lord was sorry that he made Saul king over Israel. Chapter 16 is a new venture, a new beginning, because God says to Samuel, go now to Jesse the Bethlehemite, because I have chosen one of his sons to be the next king of Israel. And of course Samuel says, well, how can I go? Because Saul isn't going to just let me go, knowing what's going to happen. And, God gives Samuel a way, say that you're going to go and offer sacrifice and stuff. And so he goes and he finds Jesse, the Bethlehemite. And, and God has said, have the sons pass by me, and they come from the eldest, he looks mature and strong, and just like Saul was head and shoulders and handsome above everybody else. So the sons of Jesse come, and God says to Samuel, I have not chosen this one. I have not chosen this one. I don't look upon the outward signs, God says. I look upon the heart. I look upon what's inside. And there's no more sons coming. And Samuel says, is this all of your sons? God has not chosen any. And the reply is, well, the youngest, the ruddy, he's out with the sheep. And this is the one we come to know as King David, the writer of many psalms. And when this young lad comes, God says to Samuel, this is my chosen one, anoint him. And so then Saul, finding out all of this kind of second hand, third hand, whatever, invites then David to come and to serve him, as one of his people of the, working in his house, working in the kingdom. So, verse 22, Saul sent to Jesse, let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my sight. So here, think of the intrigue that God has, through Samuel, anointed David as the next king. As the king, while Saul is still king. And Saul has David working with him, for him, and all that. And we know there's going to be more intrigue in the story, but, it's just, we read this historical account of the Israelites and we see how absolute God is. I mean, God is faithful to his word, and God expects us to be faithful as well. Yeah.